This is the Mindful Heart Hears, and you are listening to How the Early Greeks Lived, from the story of the Greek people, an elementary history of Greece by Eva March Tappan. If you had gone to the home of one of the ancient Greek princes in the early days, you would have come first to a high, thick stone wall with a strong folding door. When the door was drawn back and you stepped into the court, a big dog would have sprung out of his kennel to see whether he, as well as his master, thought you ought to be admitted. If the master was an especially wealthy prince, he might not have a real dog, but rather the image of one made of gold or silver. Close to the gates were benches of stone carved and polished, where people might sit and talk. In the farther part of the court were stables for the horses and oxen and carriages, and also places for pigs and geese and sheep. The court was large enough for a garden, and even an orchard of pear, apple, fig, and olive trees. Indeed, the house with its court and heavy wall was almost like a fortified village. There was a fountain, of course, and with plenty of water, with flocks and herds, and the grain that was kept in store. Such a place could have endured quite a long siege without being starved out. The house itself had porticos and pillars and many rooms. There was a second story, and here was a storeroom where the treasures of the prince were kept. There was no money in it, for the early Greeks did not use coin money. They counted the value of their possessions in oxen. For instance, a slave was worth 4 to 20 oxen. There was plenty of precious metals in other forms than money. However, for there were vases, cups, bowls, and other dishes of solid gold and silver. They were of graceful, beautiful shapes, for the Greeks so liked to have everything around them pleasing to the eye, that even the coarsest earthen dish often had a pretty border enough for a silver vase. In this storeroom there were 2 great wooden chests ornamented with gold and silver and ivory. In these were kept costly robes and cloaks and carpets and fine linen and woven coverings for the benches and beds. There were bracelets and necklaces of many sorts, and more precious than all of these, there were swords and spears and knives and bows and arrows with which the prince and his men would protect their treasures if the house was attacked by enemies. The princes who lived in such houses had slaves, some of whom had been captured in war, and some stolen away from their homes. But the masters were no more afraid to work with their own hands than the poor people who lived in huts. Homer tells us that the royal Odysseus made his own bed, and one of the poet's prettiest stories is of a fair young princess setting out with her maidens with a basket of lunch for the river bank to do the washing of the family, and then playing ball with the maidens as merrily as any girl who was not a princess might have done. It is a pity that we cannot know what was in that picnic basket, full of all manner of food to the heart's simple desire, as Homer puts it. The Greeks did not like to be hungry any better than any other people, but when they went to a feast, they thought less about the food they were to eat than about the people with whom they should talk. The Greeks enjoyed life and looked upon death as putting an end to all their joys. They believed that they would live forever, but they did not expect to be happy in the afterlife. Great heroes, to be sure, were born to a better fate. Homer said, "No snow is here, no winter long, no rain, but the loud blowing breezes of the west, the ocean stream sends us up to bring men to coolness." But the loud blowing breezes of the west, the ocean stream sends up to bring men to coolness. There the heroes went on with whatever they had liked best to do on earth, and there they enjoyed all sorts of pleasures. But no such happiness was in store for common men. They expected to be sent to a sad and gloomy place called Hades. There they would remember the light of the sun and long to see it again. They would remember their homes and friends, but almost as if they were dreaming. Nothing would seem real, and all things would be dull and cheerless. They would wander about like shadows in the dismal twilight forever, with nothing to enjoy and nothing to hope for. As the Greeks did not expect any happiness after death, they were all the more eager to have as much as possible while they lived. They thought the gods had power to give them whatever they wanted, provided the fates did not forbid. Therefore, they worshiped them in order to win favors for themselves. They did not often think of the gods as being better than men, but only as being more powerful. Parents did not say to the children, "Zeus is good, and therefore you must try to be like him." They said, "Zeus can give you what you want, and so you must offer up a sacrifice to him." They believed that one god had the power to give safe returns from journeys, another recovery from illness, another victory over enemies, and therefore they prayed to the one whom they thought most likely to grant the special favor that they had wished. How to please the gods and so get what they wanted was an important matter. The Greeks who lived at the time when Homer is thought to have sung used to talk together of the golden days when the gods walked about among men, doing them harm sometimes to be sure, but often helping and advising them. They no longer expected to meet gods and goddesses when they were walking about in the forests, and to learn their commands and feelings, they watched for signs and tokens. If a sacrifice was offered to Zeus, the falling of a thunderbolt meant that he was pleased and would grant the prayer. A sudden tempest showed that he was angry. Birds that flew far up in the air were supposed to have learned the secrets of the gods, and therefore their movements were closely watched. The Greeks believed that the gods liked to watch athletic contests, and at any large festival in honor of a god, the races were as important as the sacrifices. 4 of these festivals became famous, and the one held at Olympia in honor of Zeus was the most renowned of all. In later times, many different kinds of contests were practiced, but the foot race was among the chief event, and in earlier days the Greeks began to record the names of the victors. This marks the end of the legendary times and the beginning of the real history of Greece.